Welcome in everybody to another lesson. Today we are going to do multiplication of decimals. And multiplication is different than adding and subtracting them in some ways. Let me start out with an example here. So we have 8.6 times 7. So what you would do, like you would with a normal multiplication problem, write out everything including the decimal point. But when you're going through and doing the multiplication, ignore the decimals for the time being. You will do yourself a huge favor that way if you ignore those decimals for the time being. So 6 times 7, well, that's 42. You keep the 2, carry the 4. Alright, so 7 times 8 is 56. Plus 4 is 60. Now, here's where it gets to be different. Because in addition and subtraction, you got to have the same number of decimal places for both terms. With multiplication, you do not. You can have different numbers of decimal places for the terms. So what you got to do to get your final result is you add up the total number of decimal places you have. The first term has 1 decimal place. The second term has 0. So 1 plus 0 is 1. You need 1 decimal place. So your answer to this is going to be 60.2. You would get 60.2 for that answer. Alright. I got a few more. Let's do 5.7 times 0.8. Again, write out your equation naturally. Now when you go through and do the multiplication, for the time being, ignore any decimals that are there. You'll have 7 times 8, well that's 56, so keep the 6, carry the 5. 8 times 5, well that's 40 plus 5 is 45. Okay. Now you're going to have, since you're starting a second row, you'll have a default 0 for your first number on the right. Since you're starting a second row, now we could start with the 0 here. 0 times 7, that's 0. 0 times 5 is 0. Notice I scratched out that 5 above it because we didn't need it. Alright, now that we've done both numbers, the 0 and the 8 for multiplication, we can go ahead and add this up. This is easy. 6 plus 0 is 6. 5 plus 0, well that's 5. 4 plus 0, that's 4. Now, where it gets difficult is, what we need to do is figure out how many decimal places does each term have. First term has 1. Second decimal place has 1. So 1 plus 1 is 2. We need to have 2 decimal places. So the answer to this equation would be 4.56. Alright, I got 3 more. How about 0.04 times 6.3? Again, when writing out multiplication with decimals, they do not have to have the same number of decimal places in both terms. That's not necessary. So what you're going to do now is you're going to go through, ignore your decimals for the time being. Just pretend they aren't there and do your multiplication. So 4 times 3 is what? 12. Keep your 2, carry your 1. 3 times 0, well, that's 0 plus 1 is 1. And then 3 times 0, that's 0. Alright, we've answered the first number 3 times all these. Now, what we need to do is put a default 0 for the first number to the right since we're starting the second row. Now we deal with 6. You'll have 6 times 4 is 24, so you keep the 4, carry the 2. 6 times 0, that's 0, plus 2, that's 2. Then 6 times 0, well that's 0. Now that you've answered both of the numbers in the second term, you can go ahead and add all these up. 2 plus 0, well that's 2. 1 plus 4, that's 5. 0 plus 2 is 2. 0 plus 0 is 0. We really don't... Well, we can write it since it's... we don't necessarily have to, but we can write it. I'm going to write it. There's a reason why. So, we now have to figure out how many decimal places should the answer have. Well, the first term of the equation had 2 decimal places. The second term had 1. So 2 plus 1 is 3. Your result should have 3 decimal places, which should end up giving you 0.252. And that is exactly what you would get, is 0.252 for your answer. Alright, I got 2 more. I have 1.006 times 8.7. Okay, well, once again, we don't need to have the same number of decimal places in both terms. Since it's multiplication, we just write it as is. And then again, go ahead, ignore the decimals. Just pretend the decimals aren't there and do your multiplication. So 6 times 7, starting there, is 42. Keep your 2, carry your 4. 7 times 0, that's 0 plus 4, that's going to be 4. 7 times 0, that's going to be 0. 7 times 1, well, that'll be 7. Now that you've dealt with the first number in the second term, you got to deal with the second number, so you start by adding a default 0 to the far right. And then you start with, since you're in the second row, you have a default 0. Then you start with your next number in the term of the equation. So you have 8 times 6, well, that's going to be 48. Keep the 8, carry the 4. 8 times 0 is 0 plus 4, well, that's 4. 8 times 0, that's 0. 8 times 1 is 8. Okay. Now that we have answered both numbers of the second term of the equation, we can go ahead and just add all this up. So you have 2 plus 0 is 2. 4 plus 8, that's going to be 12. Keep the 2, carry the 1. 1 plus 0 is 1 plus 4 is 5. 7 plus 0 is 7. 0 plus 8 is 8. Now the part it's going to come down to is figuring out how many digits does the final result have. Well, the first term of the equation had 3 decimal places. The second term of the equation had 1. So 3 plus 1 is 4. Your answer is going to have 4 decimal places. So your answer should be 8.7522. That's exactly the answer you should end up getting for this. And I do have one more. Let's say I give you... let's write this down a little bit lower. 18.4 times 0.07. Okay? 18.84 times 0.07. Well, again, we ignore the decimals, pretend they're not there, we do our multiplication. So 4 times 7, that's 28. Keep your 8, carry your 2. So 7 times 8, that's 56 plus 2 is 58. So keep your 8, carry your 5. 7 times 1, that's 7 plus 5 is 12. Alright, you've dealt with the first number of the second term in the multiplication problem. Now you need to deal with the second number. So start by adding a default 0 in your second row. Scratch out the numbers you had here before for carrying out your place values. Those are not going to come into play in the next set of numbers. Now you can do 0 times 4. Well, that's going to be 0. 0 times 8, also 0. 0 times 1 is 0. So we've answered the first 2 numbers of the second term of the equation. Now we need to answer the third number. So The third number, to do the third row, you're going to start by adding 2 zeros by default. And then you can start with multiplying your zeros. 0 times 4, that's just 0. 0 times 8, that's just 0. 0 times 1, that's just 0. Now that we've answered all 3 numbers of the second term, we can go ahead and add this up. So 8 plus 0 plus 0, that's just 8. 8 plus 0 plus 0 again, that's 8. 2 plus 0 plus 0, that's 2. 1 plus 0 plus 0, that's 1. And then we have 0 plus 0 plus 0, which is 0. Now the trick is with this to figure out how many decimal places are we going to need. First term of the equation has 1 decimal place. Second term of the equation has 2 decimal places. So we're going to need a total of 3 decimal places. So your answer would be 01.288. Since you have a 0 in the tens place and zeros after that, you don't need that 0. You just have a whole number of 1. Your answer is really going to be 1.288. That would be your answer for that. So really, with multiplication, let's do one more. I'll feel better if we do one more. Let's say I choose... Yeah, let's do 1.25 times 1.75. So let's say I chose those. 1.25 times 1.75. Alright? Again, ignore your decimal places. That's the first thing you're going to do. Pretend that you don't have decimals. Second thing, start with your multiplication. 5 times 5 is 25. Keep your 5, carry your 2. 5 times 2 is 10 plus 2, which is 12. Keep your 2, carry your 1. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. We've answered the first number of the second term of the equation. Now we need to do the multiplication for the second number of the second term. So we'll add a 0 on, since that's going to be going to the second row. We add 1 0. Then we can cross out these digits we carried from doing the first number. We don't need those. Alright, now we can start with doing 7 times 5, which is 35. Keep your 5. Carry your 3. 7 times 2 is 14 plus 3, which is 17. Keep your 7. Carry your 1. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 1 is 8. Alright, let's erase those real quick. Our place value carrying. We're not going to need that to do the third number. Now to do the third number of the second term, we're going to start a third row. This time you're going to add 2 default zeros for the third row. If we had 4 numbers, we were going to do a fourth row, you'd add 3 default zeros, and so on. But since we've done our 2 default zeros, now we can just go straight through, do 1 times 5, which is 5. 1 times 2, that's going to be 2. 1 times 1, that'll be 1. Alright. Now that we've done all 3 numbers of the second term, we can add up all these results here from the multiplication. 5 plus 0 plus 0, well, that's just going to be 5. 2 plus 5, which is 7 plus 0, that's 7. 6 plus 7 is 13 plus 5, which is 18. Keep the 8, carry the 1. 1 plus 8 is 9, plus 2, which is 11. Keep the 1, carry the 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. Okay. What we got to figure out now is how many decimal places does the answer get. First term of the equation, the 1.25, had 2 decimal places. The second term, 1.75, also has 2 decimal places. So we add 2 and 2 together, you get 4. So therefore, the answer should have 4 decimal places. You should get an answer of 2.1875. So again, to recap with multiplication, it does not matter how many decimal places you have when you go to multiply the numbers together. But once you work through your multiplication, when you're working through your multiplication, ignore the decimals for the time being. Do it like a normal multiplication problem, and then when you go to write the result, the answer for the number of decimal places you need is the sum of the number of decimal places of the first term and the second term, like we've just seen here today. So that's really all there is to multiplying decimals. Next lesson we will be doing dividing decimal numbers, which are even different than this. So I hope everybody has a good night and take care.